Hi, I'm Will Becton.
And I'm Amber Becton.
It's night.
We are very happy to share episode 4 of Jett Road Studios Presents, where each episode is a pilot for a different show.
That's right. Today, we bring you the show Cowbell, hosted by Andrés du Bouchet and Tim Saccardo. The guest for the pilot is Paul Rust.
So what's the basis of this show?
Cowbell is a love letter to sketch comedy. André, very funny Conan writer. At one point, he wrote this really ridiculous sketch called Nut Spoon.
That sounds great.
And it was like this incredibly convoluted and ridiculous and funny sketch involving a lot of the crew. I want to say like John Rao was in it.
Oh, I love it.
They had a spoon that was for the nuts.
I love a spoon for the nuts.
It went missing, and so they're looking for the nut spoon. I think that was basically...
Because you weren't supposed to touch it with your hand? Is that what it was?
Probably. It was hygienic. But at one point, like a few months later, Carl Reiner came on the show and specifically cited Nut Spoon as like his favorite comedy sketch he'd seen in years.
It's so good. We have a lot of Conan writers here.
Yeah.
There is a secret that I don't think I've ever shared with your coworkers over the 12 years that you work there.
Yeah.
I'm a huge Conan fan, like a crazy Conan fan. I know every sketch.
Well, I remember when I started at Conan, you kind of were giving me a crash course on like classic characters. I should know like a lot of the McCann characters.
I remember, oh God, the hemorrhoid.
Yeah, Preparation H. Raymond.
Oh my God, it was so good. I watched Triumph with the Star Wars. I saw that like the first time.
Yep. You know what?
What?
Andy Secunda was one of the writers on the Star Wars Triumph.
So good.
He's one of our panelists today, along with the very funny Amanda Sitko. Tim Saccardo is an accomplished writer, as is Paul Rust, who's probably better known as an actor to most people.
I love having Andre here. It's just really nice to have him like as a host.
It's almost like, let's get a writer's room together. There is no show, but let's still get the writer's room together. The writer's room is the show.
Yeah.
A lot of great sketches are mentioned in this episode, and we've tried our best to include links to all of them in the show notes. End of further ado.
Jett Road Studios presents
Cowbell.
Happy to introduce Andrés du Bouchet.
Hello.
And Tim Saccardo.
Hey.
Take it away, André.
All right. Hey, Andrés du Bouchet here. This is Cowbell, which is a podcast where we geek out about our favorite comedy sketches and go down rabbit holes and analyze them and basically talk about how sketch comedy means so much to us and how much we love it. I thought about this and I was trying to remember the first sketch comedy memory of my life, and I figured it out. And it's Bill Murray on Saturday Night Live singing "Don't Eat the Yellow Line" to the tune of Yellow Brick Road. This apparently was a Wizard of Oz parody that involved Gilda Radner, I guess, like hitting her head and going unconscious and having this dream where she was in, it wasn't Oz, it was Canada. And Bill Murray.
I have not seen that. And what's funny, because it reminds me, I used to see, and this is not my first memory, but just off of yours, I would watch like the best of Dan Aykroyd or Chevy Chase or whatever, and I'd see all these great sketches. Right. And then when I finally saw like a full SNL episode, I was like, oh, there's a bunch of other ones.
Yes.
And I think that's one of the other ones. I'd never seen it.
Yeah. I don't think it is a particularly well-known or well-respected sketch in SNL history. And I couldn't even find it. You know,
my first sketch memory is when I found out what Saturday Night Live was. My parents were going out of town. I was staying with my grandmother, and I'm Italian, so I was staying with my nonna. She was just like a little old Italian lady, like not even 5 feet tall. We were watching Golden Girls or something that was on NBC, so we saw a commercial for Danny DeVito, and she's like, oh, Danny DeVito's going to be on Saturday Night Live. And I'm like, I don't know what that means.
Right.
Which is hilarious. It's this renegade show from the 70s, and my old Italian grandma is just like, oh, we got to watch Danny DeVito on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah, so Saturday Night Live is probably the introduction for a lot of us. You know, at that age, I had to like take a nap in the afternoon so that I could stay awake late enough to watch the show.
I didn't even have that. I would leave a VHS tape like in the VCR with a Post-it note explaining to my parents how to record it after they watched like whatever movie they rented that night.
Oh, wow.
And I would wake up the next morning and watch this VHS tape that like started at like 10:45 because they wanted to go to bed. So I'd have to like fast forward through the local news, and then I could watch the previous night's like Tony Danza hosting SNL.
Another episode that I don't think is probably held in the highest.
There was a great sketch in there where it was like War of the Worlds is like done by like some like Brooklyn Academy of Actors, so they all had accents, and they would say like the fucking Martians, and I guess it was far enough away from fucking that you could say it.
Right.
Has Danza been a car name yet? I wonder.
Oh yeah, the Chevy Danza.
Chevy Danza. Yeah, that sounds good.
I don't know if this is the first sketch I've ever seen, but it was the first time I remember seeing my mom like cry from laughter, and it was the Mouse Problem, the Monty Python sketch where it's like the dark kind of witness protection program kind of interview style, and it's John Cleese, and it's all about like getting together and acting like mice.
Oh yeah.
First of all, if anybody's wondering who this disembodied voice is, that's our producer Will Becton, also the owner of the studio and the person who will decide if this pilot gets greenlit. So like we really need to impress him
Will
today.
I prefer disembodied voice, but I'll take the other stuff.
How's it going so far, Will?
I think it's pretty good.
All right, good. So those are our like earliest TV, sketch comedy memories. But like since then, what has your connection been, Tim?
I don't have a professional connection to sketch. I mean, I'm a comedy writer. I wrote for Community and American Dad, and an HBO show called Vice Principals, and I did a ton of sketch at the UCB Theater with some of our upcoming guests.
Like Sketch Cram, right? Were you part of Sketch Cram?
I was part of Sketch Cram.
Oh, wow.
I don't have much professional sketch writing experience, but it's always been this thing I've enjoyed. And the sketches I gravitate to, like probably my all-time favorite is Pre-Taped Call-In Show and Mr. Show. Yep. So I like these like writery, like brain-twisty sketches. And I got to work with Dino Stamatopoulos for a couple of years on Community, and I would ask him about that because he wrote that sketch. And he was like, oh, we have these like 3 whiteboards going at the same time to like understand the logic of how it went, because it's about this call-in show where it's airing a week after it is recorded. So whoever calls in can't talk about the one that you're seeing on TV right now, and it just like ties itself in a knot 10 times.
That's a sketch I've seen numerous times, and I still don't feel like I get the premise, and I still don't feel like I'm smart enough to wrap the logic in the Mobius strip that it's meant.
I was watching it again recently because I knew we were doing the show, and what happens with me is like I know they know it's right, and that's good enough. I don't like make myself understand it the whole way through.
Yeah, those guys are smart. They know what they're doing.
I just know that everything's off by a week, and it's funny.
Right.
I'm going to take Stephen Hawking's word for this, this thing he's saying.
So comedy, yeah. So like I was basically, the awkward, nerdy kid who could only communicate by quoting comedy sketches to other people instead of actually having honest conversations. I would spend Monday mornings in homeroom reciting everything I could remember from the SNL I had seen on Saturday night, that kind of stuff. One of my good friends would recite the top 10 list from Letterman for our classmates. So we all had our little niche. And then, I got into improv in college and then moved to New York City and essentially did stand-up and sketch comedy for a decade in New York for free or whatever, and then got hired comedy writing for a few shows, and then finally got hired to write for Conan in 2009, and then wrote for him for 12 years or whatever. And that was, pretty much the dream job that I always wanted. Well, it was the real dream job I wanted was to be an SNL cast member. And then this was almost as good because I just basically got to write myself into comedy bits week after week and star in them and be the obnoxious, hey, Conan guy in the audience.
My favorite character of yours from the Conan shows were the guy who's dressed like a Game of Thrones character, but he only
just wants to talk about Wahlberg.
Yes. Winter is coming.
That was my favorite bit to do as well. All right, so anyway, we have a very special guest on our first episode of Cowbell. I was going through the IMDb page for this gentleman, and it was imposing, a vast, impenetrable forest of awesome credits. Sent in some explorers. They never came out. But I picked just a few. You saw this man in Inglourious Basterds. You saw him in Between Two Ferns, the movie. You've heard him on Bob's Burgers many times. See him currently in the Saturday Night movie, the SNL movie where he plays Paul Schaefer. He created the show Love. He wrote Pee-wee's Big Holiday. Rest in peace, Paul Rubens. I'm sure we'll talk about him a lot on this podcast, too. The list is way too long. Please welcome Mr. Paul Rust.
Oh, yeah.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
Oh, it's a pleasure for you.
It is my pleasure.
Hopefully, please.
We made this show because we're just like, I don't think Paul's enjoying his life enough.
Well, and Andre, I'll speak to your work that you were just talking about on Conan. When I first saw you, you were cracking me up.
Oh, thank God.
It was so funny. And I remember being surprised that you were a writer because you were such a good actor.
Oh, thank you.
That I was like, oh, that's not somebody who writes their own bits and then acts them. You were,
Thank you so much.
Yeah, really fantastic.
Funny you say that. One of my earliest memories of doing comedy bits in New York back in the 90s was that people would come up to me after the show and be like, that was really funny. Did you actually write that? Because they thought I was just like the actor that was.
Yeah, no, fantastic. Bravo.
Thank you. Thank you.
Tim, love your work as well.
Oh, thank you, sir.
I've known you for years.
I was going to say, you guys are already well acquainted.
We're closing in on like 20 years maybe, which is absurd.
And we would cross paths at the aforementioned Sketch Cram.
Mm-hmm.
One of my favorite memories of Sketch Cram, Armin Weitzman was an actor on it. And for people who don't know, a Sketch Cram, it was crammed because you'd come up with the ideas, write it, rehearse it, and put on the show within
less than 24 hours.
Yeah.
Like writers showed up at 10 a.m., wrote all day, show was up at midnight.
The actors would have to like memorize their scripted lines. And Armin, who's a great actor, but could have a month to memorize lines and you'd still be crossing your fingers. He had to like also be a straight man in a sketch, which is pretty funny to imagine because he's a lovable nut. But
aren't we all?
He had memorized these lines as a straight man, but he couldn't remember them. And I remember he went up on a line, so he had to improvise what he thought was a straight man line. And I think about it.
That doesn't make sense.
Yes, right. And I think about it anytime I'm watching a sketch where it's just sort of perfunctory, like straight man work, because I just want them to say the line that Armin improvised, which was, I'm starting to think you're kind of a quirky dude.
Oh, man. That's amazing. I remember that.
Any straight man in a sketch could eventually say, I'm starting to think you're kind of a quirky dude.
It pretty much covers a lot of bases. So it's like, this has got to work.
You know what that kind of reminds me of? Jack McBrayer was always the best at just saying what was going on, and it was always funny. He would just literally describe the situation, and it always worked.
It's true.
Oh, his voice is so wonderful. Yeah.
Yeah, as a young lover of sketch and improv, I remember on a high school trip to Chicago, went to the Second City ETC.
Oh, wow.
And I got to see Jack McBrayer. This was before, I remember when he popped up on Conan. I was like, that's the guy from the Second City I saw. But he was so funny, and he had like the charisma of John Ritter.
That's a good comparison.
Like, Joy, he's got affability about him that's really fun to watch.
I've had a lot of great conversations with Jack McBrayer. Like, as nice as he is talented, kind of like Brian Stack, who's another name I'm sure will come up a bunch of times on this podcast.
That first season of, I don't know if you call him a season, but the September 1993 when Conan O'Brien started doing late night shows.
I remember exactly where it was when I watched that.
Yeah, same. I remember they did, John Goodman was the first guest, and they did an actual items bit.
Yeah.
Oh, man.
Radiohead was the musical guest.
Wow, that's awesome.
Jim Pitt, shout out to
Coming
Jim
out
Pitt.
of the gate hard with like a classic bit. Right? Actual items. I think that was probably like, I'd watch that and be like, oh, this is the show.
Yeah, it was my first taste of what probably people would call alt comedy, and it was really exciting because I hadn't seen anything like it. You know, the critical reaction was so like people were being such snotty pants about the thing. I was like, I don't know what they're talking about. This is awesome. And like Tim's experience, I would set up a VCR and record Conan episodes and run home from school to watch them. And the actual items, my favorite one is it was a picture of a chair. Somebody was selling a chair, and a little thing next to it said, "Sorry, girls, it's married."
That's pure absurdism.
But that's how I first saw, Dino Stanatopoulos as well. And
I believe he was Tamari the ostrich.
That's a legendary thing.
And the kiss-ass turkey.
Yep.
Be Thanksgiving week. He was Conan's turkey that he was planning to eat.
Right.
He'd be doing his monologue, and then you'd start hearing someone in the audience laughing really
way
hard.
too hard. Yeah.
And then it would cut to this turkey, and in the perfect way, like any sketch, it's like janky. You know, It doesn't look good. It's just like sort of this like little puppet that's shaking
around. Wouldn't it be funny
around.
to look good? Yeah.
Exactly. He would eventually over-laugh, and then Conan would be like, okay, I see what you're doing.
Right.
Fine, I won't eat you. And then he would always go like, sucker, and then leave with like 2 babes.
Yep.
And the Dino Sanatopoulos improv line that I assume it was improvised. He stands up with these 2 babes, and he goes, okay, ladies, now let's go have some bestiality.
Oh my God.
That Conan was the show, like older people introduced Letterman to me. Like I remember my cousin David was like, oh, you have to watch this guy. And I'd watch Top 10 lists. Conan was the first one like, oh, I discovered this. I'm the one who's like out like evangelizing, like trying to tell people you got to watch this show.
Without a doubt.
They do the weirdest shit.
Yeah.
Ditto, yeah.
I know the SNL sketch that you're talking about, the Canada one.
That would have been from 1977 or 78, I think.
Yeah, Nick at Night would do these half-hour, they would squeeze down episodes of SCTV and Saturday Night Live like in the late 80s. And so I remember it was the first time I heard the word Saskatchewan.
In that sketch?
Yeah.
Wow.
I was like, what's that word? And then it was my first yellow snow joke I'd ever heard too. Yeah.
All right.
First of many.
No, I mean, most of the stuff I watched was all like, not bad. It was just like, you can't do that on television on Nickelodeon, the kids' sketch show. Yeah. And then Carol Burnett and Hee Haw. And
I loved Carol Burnett. Oh.
Yeah. That was probably my first, like, seeing a sketch and realizing what it was. But
and also realizing the power of cracking in the middle of a bit. Which they did constantly on Carol Burnett.
Yes. Oh, my gosh. To see Harvey Korman break a smile was like seeing your dad smile. Right. You were just like, oh, there's a crack in the veneer of
No one's ever said that about sketch comedy before. Like, related it to, like, seeing your stern father who withholds love finally give it to you. That's what Harvey Korman means to me.
I can relate.
But, I still love sketch comedy. I think if you're a comedy writer, it's the purest form of comedy to write.
I haven't done sketch in a while, but I'm still in like writers' rooms for TV, and someone will say something, and I'll just be like, "Oh, that's a sketch." Like that part of my brain is still functioning, where I'm like identifying little nuggets that like you could just like have fun with for 3 minutes, but no longer.
Exactly. I mean, you get to have a premise just for like 3 minutes to have fun, and then performers get to kind of do things at full tilt. Like I think about all the time I've wasted as a quote unquote comedy writer thinking about arcs.
Oh, God.
And what's this character want, and how is they going to get it or not? I'm like, this is not funny.
Oh, it's so much easier to be like, what kind of dumb voice do I want to use? What's the premise? And what are 5 awesome jokes?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Back when it was still Twitter, I still remember this. I talk about it sometimes. You had a tweet that said something like, a comedy movie is like basically curing a character of what makes them funny.
Yeah.
And I was like, that's true. Like, it's like liar, liar. Like, it's so funny watching him lie, but don't worry, we'll make him lie less. And by the end, he'll hug somebody. Like,
yeah. It's 2 hours of watching a character slowly become less funny.
Yeah. That's great. Short form comedy is the best.
Yeah.
So all the stuff we talked about so far is, 90s, like all the Conan stuff. And I feel like the bits that, Paul, that you suggested to us that we cover, you gave us 4 bits. And I think they're all from the 90s era as well.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about them each briefly before we get to the main one that we're going to discuss. Tell us about Taco Mailman.
Yes, Taco Mailman.
I loved it. I thought I'd seen all of the state stuff, but I don't recall having seen that bit before, and I laughed a lot. It's presented as a very amiable conversation between Michael Ian Black as the homeowner who walks out into the street, and I believe it's Kevin Allison who plays the mailman. But he keeps putting just tacos into Michael Ian Black's mailbox instead of the mail. Michael Ian Black, in very earnest fashion, is like, I appreciate the tacos, and they're actually very good tacos, but I'd really prefer it if you gave us our mail. And that's basically the core premise of the sketch. And then they have a conversation, and Kevin Allison kind of doesn't quite understand what the big deal is because the tacos are great. So what's the
slighted?
So what's the problem?
Yeah.
And then,
so what draws you to this sketch, Paul? Like, why is it on
the 2 words you use, the amiable and earnest, I think is like what's really funny about it is like they're being so kind to each other about something that normally somebody would be like.
Michael Ian Black is like not flying into a rage, which is what I would do. It's like, give me my fucking mail.
I've noticed that since you've been delivering tacos, we haven't been getting the mail as much or at all.
He's like, well, there's not enough room in my mailbag for both tacos
and then
and the
Kevin
mail.
That's the exchange. Him saying that, then Kevin Allison's response as the mailman is like, "I'll be honest with you, these bags for mail weren't really designed for carrying tacos."
I'm going to take you behind the curtain here for a second and let you know.
Yes, right. So the fact that they're so amiable with each other, it reminds me, you mentioned Pee-wee's Big Holiday that I co-wrote with Paul Rubens, who's the funniest person I ever got to meet and work with.
It's not a surprise.
Yeah, just a true hero. When you were saying that you would quote sketches as a way, I was like the Pee-wee kid, like doing Pee-wee voices in the classroom. Dear God. But that was me.
And I was doing Ed Grimley voices.
Yeah.
But I was doing Hans and Franz for my family at like holidays and making them
I was
watch
doing
me.
Hans and Franz in the high school talent show.
I would love a video collection of people's high school talent shows doing SNL characters. There's a whole legacy of that.
Oh my God.
It's the same way with Pee-wee. There's a part where in Pee-wee's Big Adventure that I'm like, oh, this is what made Paul Rubens a genius, was at the very beginning, Pee-wee steps out of his house. He yells out to the neighbor, I'm going to water the lawn now. And the neighbor goes, okay, Pee-wee. And he closes his window and Pee-wee starts the sprinkler, and it sprays like water on the guy's windows, and the guy inside is laughing and waving. And you think about all the comic characters, every single character outside of Pee-wee would be, the joke is he turns on the sprinkler, it goes into the neighbor's house, and the neighbor shakes his fist and gets angry. But in the Pee-wee world, nobody ever says, why are you wearing that suit and that bow tie? What's wrong with you? And I talked about it with Paul once, and he was like, oh, yeah. I would put it as, nobody comes up to him and goes, it's not Halloween. Why are you trick-or-treating? Like, nobody ever points out the costume. But that's what I like about the Taco Mailman sketch, is nobody really calls out what's truly absurd about this. They're like,
Michael and Max trying to be understanding, kind of.
Doing their best to understand the Taco Mailman.
I didn't have cable when I was a kid, so when the state was on, I think I remember seeing it at like high school parties, like someone would have it on or whatever, so I had a lot to catch up on. And at the end of Taco Mailman, when the mailbox just walks away and everyone's like, goodbye, mailbox, like that detail was so crazy to me. It's so the opposite of the way I think. I'm so like logical if I'm trying to lay stuff out. I would have never thought of that. Give me a million years.
Oh, I know. When people say, oh, it's so hard to end a sketch.
No, it's very easy to end a sketch. It's just not always good.
Right. Because and I'm not saying you were saying it's hard to end a sketch, but it's just like, because usually it's like there's no responsibility for anything that is at the end. Like you could go totally cuckoo. And so having
that's why I love the mailbox
walking away, it's like, oh, now we don't have to do 10 pages about the mailbox's feelings.
No, you just like leave a mess and walk away from it. And
That's right. Exactly. Yeah.
Let's move on to another sketch, which is actually a recurring sketch. They did this, I counted, 15 times in 4 seasons of SNL. It was Toonces the Driving Cat.
Yeah.
What about that sketch was so special to you?
Probably similar to Taco Mailman.
Yeah.
Everybody's being so good-hearted about Toonces.
And willingly getting into the car with him.
The first time it crashes, they go, Victoria Jackson asked Steve Martin, like, why did you do that? And he was like, I don't know. I saw him behind the steering wheel, and I thought maybe he could drive. But then also the jankiness again of like, if a sketch is too polished, it like becomes less funny. Like the bad, not bad, it's just the rear projection, and the fake little fake paws on the steering wheel, using the same stock footage of the car going over the cliff.
Time. Yeah, I love that stuff.
And that's Jack Handy, I believe, wrote that.
Jack Handy's amazing.
Which is another name I'm sure we'll hear a bunch of times.
Who also wrote one of my all-time favorites, Unfrozen Caveman Lawyer.
Oh, yes, of course.
Oh, boy. Somebody's going to bring that one in at some point.
I hope so.
Because of all the puppetry stuff, I initially assumed it was a Robert Smigel bit because of his predilection for using puppets and
real animals with fake paws.
And so I don't know. It's Jack Handy, who's like a legendary comedy writer.
And writes some really funny books.
That's what I've heard. Yeah,
it's amazing. Like each sentence is funny in his books. It's like wild. Sense. Yeah.
Let's introduce a couple more people to our fold.
Yes,
we have even more
people.
Funny, talented people with us. First up, we have a gentleman that is also a former Conan writer. He worked there before I did on the Late Night with Conan O'Brien show, the revered version of the show. The influential, revered, iconic Late Night.
You were in the maligned reboot.
I was. Yeah.
You're in the Caddyshack 2.
I was in the Kirstie Alley version of Cheers. This guy was in the Shelley Long version.
I will say that Kirstie Alley is one of the few additions to a show that actually made it better, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's a compliment. That's
so
good.
So not an apt comparison.
Also on EP on the Goldbergs. Also, real quick anecdote, when I first moved to New York City in 1996, I think it was, the very first live sketch comedy show I saw as an audience member was The Two Andys, starring this guy and Andy Daly. Please welcome Andrew Secunda.
Thank you.
Yay!
So good to be here.
And she wrote and directed a bunch of UCB sketch teams back when Paul and I were in that world. She worked with Bruce McCullough on sketches for Kids in the Hall live tour and wrote on all 4 seasons of IFC's Brockmire. Amanda Sitko.
Yay! Come on down.
Friends.
Hi, guys.
Hi.
How's it going?
This podcast is going great. I think it's going to be a hit.
Thanks.
And he said that on the first WTF. You're there with Mark Maron.
Mark, this is really a good idea.
Interviewing me for your first podcast.
You're really starting with the Giants.
So let's get to, going into my game show host voice, the sketch that we all decided to talk about from Mr. Show.
Yeah, the Fairsley Difference.
The Fairsley Difference.
Okay, so the Fairsley Difference first aired on Mr. Show with Bob and David, which is on HBO, Season 4, Episode 4, which is the same episode as The Story of Everest, which is another legendary sketch, 1998. It stars David Cross and Bob Odenkirk. David Cross plays Len Gibbons of Gibbons Market, the old-timey good place. Bob Odenkirk is the voice of the more modern Fairsley Foods.
So, Paul, what was like about this sketch? What grabs you? What makes you love it?
Just the first time I saw it, I cracked up so hard. I had tears streaming down from my face. And Mr. Show, my friend bought tapes off of eBay, and it was like the fall of 2000 before they'd came out in DVD. So I would just sit in my dorm room and put on tapes and laugh, and this one cracked me up. I also taped episodes of the State there as well, and I've held on to those because the DVD couldn't get the music clearances.
Oh, yeah.
So it's very important sometimes to hold on to your tapes.
Oh, yeah. No, when I met my now wife, she had old State sketches on a VHS, and I had like this magic machine that could burn DVDs. So like she came over to my place and we would like watch the State, and like I was burning it onto DVD so she could watch it, because the issue was always this, like, no one thought music rights would make a difference. Who's ever going to watch this at home? No one watches TV besides the first time it ever airs, you know.
That's funny. I met my wife because she moved to Los Angeles, and the new season premiere of Breaking Bad started, but she didn't have her cable set up. So she asked me if she could come over and watch Breaking Bad. So being used for our tech know-how.
Yeah, this is how you win a spouse. Good to know.
Schmidt's Gate comes to mind because they don't have the Van Halen song anymore.
Yeah.
Oh, which Van Halen song did they
Beautiful
use?
Girls.
And I really do think the sketch suffers from it.
It's
like
tough.
I've seen it without the real song.
Yeah.
So what happens in the Fairsley Difference?
Oh, I think in the 90s, especially in Los Angeles, it was all about competing grocery stores. Like,
Oh, it was a real thing.
Yeah, like Ralph's was trying to fire a shot across the bow of Vaughn's, and
So quaint little mom and pop operation Ralph's.
yeah.
Yeah.
But it also has the tinge of like a political ad where you're talking about
Attack ad, yeah.
For sure. Let's watch the Fairsley Difference from Season 4 of Mr. Show. NPR voice.
My grandfather started selling good food to good people back in 1926.
David Cross is a mild-mannered owner of a grocery store.
You know, we may not be as big and fancy as some other stores,
Not
but
a very good wig or mustache.
what's so fancy about high prices?
Gibbons, the old-timey good place with 15 convenient locations.
He's the first one to lob an attack, actually.
That's right.
Good point.
He shot first.
Yeah.
That's a good
I'm
point.
thinking of it in a different way now.
Sure. Gibbons Markets may save you a dime on select items.
The Fairsley company starts running counter ads.
All our produce is 25% off, and you'll never find a rat. Good prices, no rats. That's the Fairsley Difference.
One of the things I like so much is how like efficiently they set up this mom and pop versus like the corporate, like to the point where like they call it the old timey good place. Like you'd never say that in real life. Gibbons, the old timey good place, has like a man. He's associated with it.
Oh, and just to let you know, we've never had a rat here at Gibbons. I don't know what that was in reference to. But.
The other one's a disembodied voice that's like you never get to see, right?
Yes.
Pork chops, $1.29 a pound.
With a much better, polished, loud theme song.
Yeah.
And unlike some places, you'll always find apples.
The music underneath each of them does so much of the heavy lifting, right? Like underneath the old-timey good place, there's like Motel 6 kind of music. Like,
We'll leave the light on for you.
Yeah.
Gibbons, now with 9 locations.
No.
Number of locations went down.
The audience gets that too, which I love.
And at Fairsley, you can shop comfortably, knowing your children will not be abducted, then shipped off to a Pakistani whorehouse, where they'll spend the rest of their lives in homoerotic servitude.
I'd argue that any kind of servitude is bad to live in.
The Fairsley Difference.
No child has ever been taken from a Gibbons market.
Good acting here from David Cross as well.
Yeah.
He's being dramatic.
Also, in the security room here, it's still part of the market, so there's like a beef chart in the background.
That's great.
Squash is on sale.
That's my favorite part. The defeated squashes on sale.
Come on down to Ribbons.
Is that Brian Posehn?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
I want your money.
Promise number 1, our stores are not constantly on fire. Promise number 2, employees are free of active sores and lesions. And promise number 3, homeless people do not defecate in our store aisles.
Again, I think anybody defecating is bad.
Fairsley Foods, now with 23 locations to serve you.
Well, we're back to our roots. Driving the same streets my grandfather started on.
He has 2 cans of beans for sale.
Sirens and car alarms in the background.
Lenny, you failed me.
But Grandpa, Fairsley Food lied.
Oh, shut up. Hey, Mr. Gibbons. Hiya, Lenny.
Hey, he's going to the next sketch.
Hey, look at that.
Yep.
Oh.
And then that's Everest.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't
wow.
realize that.
A 1-2 punch.
Which is something you wouldn't know from a standalone YouTube.
That's true. The version I watched cut off before that.
I think that's just a lazy way to not end a sketch.
Tell it to Monty Python.
So before I forget, I almost left out like kind of the coolest part of the, we were having a hard time, or I was having a hard time figuring out who the actual writer was, or the primary writer. And so we reached out to BJ Porter, who very nicely wrote back, "Hi, pretty sure we referred to it as Fairsley. Easier to put on an index card." And while it got a big room / Bob Odenkirk overhaul, the sketch came from Jerry Collins' sketch packet to get a job on the show.
Cool.
Jerry was, and I presume is, a great guy. Good luck with the podcast.
Hey.
So very cool.
Nice
So thank
info
you
there.
to BJ Porter.
That's
BJ Porter.
good. I worked on this show called The Right Now Show that was like a pilot for Fox as a potential Mad TV replacement with Scott and BJ. And BJ wrote a sketch that we didn't get to do, but it was that Bruce Banner, it's like a Hulk spoof where he's like, "You wouldn't like to see me when I get angry." And then he gets angry, and then little wormy me comes in, and I'm all spray painted green. Like he unbeefs.
Reverse Hulk. Someone was talking about how like David Cross is actually doing some good acting in this.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And you see him like kind of like get to more and more defeated. And because I was rewatching Pre-Tape Call-In Show, which is one of my favorites, I'm like, oh, he does the same thing in that one, but in reverse, because he starts all frazzled, and then as you go to previous weeks, he gets less and less frazzled.
It's
until
like Memento.
The very beginning, the very end of the sketch is like him being like fresh-faced and his hair's all nice.
Do we want to get our panelists sort of their take on the sketch?
Oh, please.
Yeah, what's your favorite part of the sketch? What?
It was something I really like about it, and as a person that like used to teach writing and stuff to young up and coming sketch writers, I like that they what I would call like make love to the joke.
Yeah.
Like it's nice. They don't just shove it in there and go like funny, funny, funny. Like it's like takes the time to build, and it's so much more rewarding because then you can get to Posehn sitting on a pile of apples farting.
Yeah.
And it's like that second beat, like apples, like weirdly, like you would think, like, oh, we're heightening things. We said they had a rat, and now like they have no apples is somehow less than that, but also weirder and bigger.
And then it jumps way forward with child abduction after they apples.
Yeah, the build is so patient in a way that you can't today. Like,
Right, exactly.
The slow build, the first one, there's no spin. It's just this old-timey market. Oh, there was no bit. And then the slow thing of like, oh, a small shot across the bow. Yeah. And then you even go back. Is it the third one? It's the third one that the locations are shrinking, right?
Yes.
Yeah, the first
So
two,
it's
they
not
haven't
even
even
when you
shrunk.
go
first
back
two, the
to it, it's
locations
not
are
having
15.
any effect. It's just a subtle, like, no, everything's fine.
I didn't think of that. Like the first Gibbons ad is there's no real jokes in it besides like, isn't it funny that David Cross is acting like this guy? Yeah. Right?
When they go over to the competitor, the first commercial, I think there's 2 normal things they say before the third weird one. Then when they go back, it's one normal thing and then a weird. And then when they come back, it's all weird.
Right. Great build.
You pointed out like it takes them a few beats to start losing stores.
Yeah.
So they lose like 6 and they lose another 6. And then the next one I love is that for the very first time we see that Fairsley has a bunch of them. And it's never said, but I think implied that they just took over.
like Starbucks.
Yeah, I wish we could like overlay the
Home
maps to
Depot.
be like, are they just taking over the exact location?
I thought about
That would be a great touch.
overlaying. I was just like, should I go back and look at the locations of the Fairsleys and see if they line up?
Right.
The heart of the thing to me that's funny about it is the ruthlessness of the perspective of this sketch is just delighting. It's like Gibbons clearly is a nice person with a nice grandfather. It's a nice family business. There's no reason at all to enjoy his downfall other than it's funny that he's
Pure sadism.
And then the competitor is just this disembodied voice on an exterior of a huge supermarket. With all the Mr. Show sketches, I think there's like only one that like doesn't have some sort of teeth or some sort of comment. You could tell like ideas were pitched by like, I saw this on TV and I hated it.
Yeah.
And then now I want to do a spoof thing about something I hate. Or like a human trait or behavior that they point out. It seems like that was like the ingredients for a Mr. Show sketch. It couldn't just be
And also like
silly.
a strong like logic engine.
Yeah.
To Paul's point, like it couldn't be like, it's the big feet guy. He's got big feet and it's really funny. It's like, no, like there's a point of view.
Yeah.
And that's also, I believe, Bob Odenkirk coming from SNL, there was probably a little bit of a shift away from the thing you're kind of talking about, Tim, where he doesn't want to go to, I got kind of a quirky thing. You know, here's a thing that's sort of more attitude than it is anything else.
In Will's like research dump before, you're saying that like Mr. Show came from like they were both on Ben Stiller's show together, right?
Yeah. I believe Odenkirk as a writer, Cross as a performer.
Yeah. And that show was very...
That had some good
parody.
stuff.
It did have some good stuff. There's a sketch called B- Time Traveler I think about a lot.
Oh, I love Ben Stiller's
where it's like she's a bad student and she gets to go through time, but she can't remember any of the stuff, so she can't like save the day. I think
was
it
that Jeanine Garofalo?
It is Jeanine Garofalo.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds
But
fun.
I can see them like, you know, a lot of that was like when I watch old Ben Stiller shows, which not very often because it's like, oh, this is a parody of a commercial from 1993 or whatever. But I can see if you're like in a world where all you can do is parodies, you're like, I gotta say something. And now that thing is Fairsley.
No, I mean, before Mr. Show and after, I don't think there's been sketch show that has like this sort of incisiveness. Like the only sketch that I think that they did that's purely silly is like the mobsters who don't know a number over
24 is the highest
number higher than 24.
24 is the highest number. I guess maybe they're like, oh, machismo in mob movies are bullshit, and we're kind of like making fun of that.
They're idiots,
but yeah. Outside of that, though,
one thing that occurred to me is the audience is like on board with the less locations thing like right away.
It's a smart audience. Yeah,
yeah. I think they trust their audience. Like
This is a good sketch to have the studio audience laughing because it's a pattern sketch, right? So like the fun of it is they learn the pattern and then it's like, ooh.
They're anticipating.
What's it gonna
Giggles
be?
of anticipation.
That would be a good like exercise to go back and kind of clock where the laughs are and see if people like, watch the audience basically catch on to it.
Yeah.
We were talking about Sketch Cram before. I watched so many sketches performed, and one of the worst feelings ever would be like when the setup gets bungled and people don't understand it, and then you start hitting these jokes and no one's laughing because you can feel the confusion in the room, right?
The joke isn't the problem.
Yeah.
It was this bungled setup.
There was like 3 pieces of information you needed to make everything funny. You got 2 of them, so nothing's funny. And guess what? There's 4 more minutes.
The longest 4 minutes.
I love sketches and writing them and stuff, but I could never, when I was performing sketches at the UCB, the first beat was always the biggest laugh, and then it was just every beat after was just slow diminishing returns. I never knew how to figure it out.
I wonder what was
You need to take Amanda's class.
You should have written one joke sketches. Then it's like
just do laughing. Yeah.
Sometimes the premise is just the funniest thing, right? Like, and then like maybe that's all that idea is good for.
Yeah.
In my experience, it is about logic and math on some level. So if you're starting with a certain thing, it's like, oh, this is funny. This is why I started writing the sketch. And then you don't have the math engineering to be like, okay, so then where does it go? Or do I make that the second beat and then do a smaller joke to lead up to it?
Yes.
You have to think of it like music, where it's like, oh, is this song going to have a beautiful beginning that then crescendos and we're out? Or is it like something that just starts like a Blink-182 song and goes for 30 fucking seconds?
Like, I feel like a huge part of like any comedy writing is sometimes you come up with this idea and you realize this is the thing that goes last, actually, and I need to work backwards.
Reverse engineering is a great, can be a lot of fun too. I want to see this happen. That's got to be the climax.
Yeah.
How do I get there? All right, well, to work
When
backwards.
I took a sketch writing class with Matt Besser, I remember he taught me something that was really valuable, which was like when you try to come up with examples, write 20 and then pick the best 3. Obviously, I didn't do that right because I was just saying none of my sketches got laughs after the first. But like a lot of it was because the first 3 you would come up with would either be stuff you've seen before or stuff that was familiar, and it wasn't until like your 9th or 10th idea that stuff started feeling original or fresh.
Yeah, UCB is always sort of builds on one of the cornerstones is the third thought thing, which is like, don't go with your first thought or second thought, go with the interesting.
I thought it was don't think at all.
Well, it's the opposite. It's the thinkiest place I've ever been involved in.
There are a lot of logic flaws in the philosophy itself.
It's not watertight.
Don't think except when.
But in terms of the third thought thing, I think this is a good example of like how you have to apply that correctly, because this is taking a thing that feels familiar at the beginning and then you expand to the third thought twists on it. You have to start with the reality and then build.
That's one of the reasons we all liked it so much. Was like the slow build. And
today it maybe should start one
so
beat
curious
later.
Because if we could see the original script, does it start with the sepia toned flashback, or was that something they had to reverse engineer because it was going to lead into this Everest sketch?
Could be.
So that's also fascinating to be like, because I was like, they took the time to make that feel so cool and real, and then it goes into the modern commercial, but maybe that wasn't even a part of the original submission.
Yeah.
Well, this is the perfect opportunity to move on to the next segment of our show. We're calling it the Writer's Room, and we've just kind of broken down this sketch, figured out what makes it tick. We all love it. We love kind of this world. So let's play in this sandbox a little bit with our panelists and our guests and all our funny people in this room. We're obviously not trying to punch up this sketch. It's a classic. But what other jokes or beats would feel at home in this world? We don't have to say where they'd go or anything, but what are some other possibilities?
I just also had the thought of he goes home and he just sees a Fairsley bag on the counter, and it's like, my wife shopped at Fairsley.
That's great.
And it's just it goes into the world of did you fuck my wife? Did you shop at Fairsley?
I like that it leaves the structure of the commercial thing, and we're just following this guy as his life has crumbled. He has no more store, so now he's home. And what else is Fairsley doesn't stop?
Or he runs into Bob Odenkirk and he's like, your voice sounds Very familiar.
Oh, yeah.
No.
Or, you know what the move is? So it's like he comes home, the bag's on the counter, and he hears the voice. We still never see the guy. He hears the Fairsley voice coming from like out of the bedroom.
Or he's like, is it okay if I leave my toothbrush here? Or something?
Toothbrush is $1.99. Can I leave it in your bathroom?
Going off of that, I also had like a really fucking bizarre idea, which is, if this is true, like if there's a Gibbons, there's got to be a Fairsley, right? There's got to be a guy. So we talk about this disembodied voice. So I also thought about like, does Gibbons set off to find him? But when he finds him, it's just, I was thinking of like an end of one of those movies like Avatar or whatever, where it's like he fucking shows up and it's just like a face on a mechanical body. And it's, like, and it's this like super, and it's just like, oh, you are the embodiment of capitalism and this machine's going to eat us. And,
That's great.
I sort of had another crazy thing, which is, but he goes back in time to change the course of history so that Gibbons is on top and Fairsley is not. But of course, the fun of it is that it always goes wrong, and somehow he keeps making it worse and worse and worse for himself. Another thing that I was sort of thinking, if you wanted to go more beats with the same sketch, is that he then switches into a different, like he uses the space for Gibbons Market to open up a nail salon. He like tries to get away from Fairsley, and then Fairsley opens a nail salon.
That's the way to make it a recurring sketch, is that he keeps trying new businesses.
So let's move on to because the next round would be like how this sketch was a one-off sketch. Like Toonces we were talking about before, they made 15 of them. Like, how could you make this recurring?
yeah, because to me it's all mom and pop versus corporate.
Mm-hmm.
But like my first thought, I don't know why, my first thought was like a small town gynecologist versus like, because just the idea of like there's no rats, I was just like, where do I not want to see a rat? Because it could even just be like public school versus private school. It's like anything that would be super commercialized.
But that's also funny, is to come up with things that you would not normally think of as being massive and commercialized.
Or mom and pop.
Yeah, or mom and pop, yeah.
The first thing I had thought of in this, and we already kind of touched on it a little bit, was like taking it out of the grocery store world. And it's just like Gibbons' life is shattered and he has no more business, but he's just trying to make a go of it. And he's got like a job as a part-time like greeter at Walmart, and they're still going after him. Like it's like a horror movie or something. Like it can't get away.
He ends up in prison, and then Fairsley is in prison with him, sort of trying to get the prisoners to treat him worse and worse.
I thought you were going to say Fairsley's the warden.
That's even that's better. That's better.
I don't know if it's better. I like that, like, because like the prisoners are kind of worse to each other than the wardens, depending on. I've been in prison, so I know a lot of stuff.
Okay, yeah.
It's good to have real life experience as a comedian.
So we talked a little bit about what can make it recurring. Our final round, and this is like a high degree of difficulty because there are very few of these that work. Could this sketch be a movie, and what would the movie be?
The immediate thing that I thought was structure it like Godfather 2. And you start it with like the building of the Gibbons thing and the fight, and then you go back in time and see the grandfather as a child coming to America through Ellis Island, and it's this parallel massive epic story of the battles between these two families.
I like that you picked one of the longest movies ever to adapt a sketch into. It is 100 times longer than the sketch.
I want to know why. Like, that was my thing too. Of like, if he confronts and it's like, I'm going to find Fairsley, but like, I think in the movie I want to answer like, why? What is it that they have against Gibbons that they're going for him so hardcore?
Well, I think in the sepia-toned version, like part of your Godfather movie, like I think old-timey Fairsley and Gibbons, like you know, 3 generations ago, meet each other in like Gangs of New York era Manhattan or something.
Right. That's where the fight. That's where the feud started.
They started a store together.
Yes.
It used to be called Gibbons and Fairsley.
Oh, yeah.
And then they had a falling out. And yeah.
My movie is like, so we fade up on Gibbons Grocers and Fairsley Foods, competing with ads, just like with this.
Fade up. Wow, you're using like real terms.
I'm a cinema guy here. I've transcended sketch. No, so basically the beginning would be what we see here, right? They're squabbling back and forth in their ads. But then when the aliens invade Earth, these former rivals must team up to save the planet by running ads against the aliens.
I bet by the end they realize they're kind of alike.
Oh, yeah.
The differences are
The
pretty
aliens are
small.
I've never
compared
popped out
to
of someone's chest. I don't know where they're getting that from.
Or do we find out to combine Tim and Amanda's ideas? Do we find out, like, when Gibbons tries to figure out who is Fairsley, is it an alien conspiracy that is slowly trying to take down the world supermarket at a time through negative ads?
When we're in like the alien like lair with all their like the people who are planning this, they're just like, grocery stores are where they get their food. If we take them over one by one, we'll take control of the food supply.
And make a tiny profit to boot.
I remember you got this Mr. Show What Happened book here, and I bought that myself as well on the Mr. Show tour. Hooray for America. I think it was like 2003. There's a tidbit about the sketch where they went through different fart sound effects for Brian Posehn's fart, and that each one was funny, but then they picked the one that was best. And I do think that speaks to their care that they put into it. Honestly,
it really does. That speaks to the OCD sketch writer mindset.
Yes, a hack would just take any fart sound effect and put it there.
Yeah.
But
when I was working with Bruce McCullough, he once made a joke about, he's like, I don't need a bunch of writers in the room just arguing over what the funniest number is. Instantly.
It's 4.
Instantly I went 33. It's 33.
I always use 4.
Because of Rolling Rock or
14. Well, should we wrap it up? What do you think? This has been a blast. I thought, let's do some plugs.
Ooh.
Yeah, anybody want to plug anything? What do you got going on?
I have a podcast with Matt Gorley called With Gorley and Rust, and it's about horror movies. We talk about horror movies.
Gorley is one of my favorite people, I think. I love Matt Gorley.
Yeah.
People are listening to a podcast in a podcast app right now. They could look that up.
It would just take one move of the thumb.
Super convenient.
Since we're talking about podcasts, I have a Star Trek podcast called Star Trek The Next Conversation.
That's great.
The title is the best part of the podcast, just to alert you. With Matt Myra, where we go through the canon of Star Trek.
All of Star Trek or just The Next Generation?
We started with Next Generation. Now we're on to DS9.
Oh, wow.
If you want to join the Patreon, you get all the new Trek and Enterprise and Voyager.
Ooh.
And then I also have a podcast just started with Sean Conroy called Co-Pilots.
Oh.
That's about TV pilots.
Oh, right on.
Yeah.
Okay,
That's
great.
awesome.
I'll listen to that
So
too.
if any of you
Sean.
want to come on and be a guest, happy to have you.
Yeah.
I am currently unemployed.
Oh, me too, by the way.
Oh,
Available
same.
for
Yeah.
all
You didn't
your
notice Paul and I
staffing
talking
needs.
about podcasts?
Oh, can I say that too? Yeah, please staff me on something.
I should set the scene that we're all recording this on a Thursday morning at like 11:30, and we're all available.
You're saying the quiet part loud.
This might seem super cheesy, but I always say at the end of a podcast, I like to pitch like, if you see something you like, especially if your friends did it, reach out and like tell that person because it means a lot.
Yeah, that's a good point.
So so if you hear something you like or you see a show or anything, like make sure you communicate that.
Those are the best emails I've ever got, and like one of my like memories of Harris Whittles was after I wrote an episode of Community, my very first episode of TV ever, and like we weren't like best friends or anything, but I got like a midnight email from him that was just like a sentence long. It was like, "Good ep, dude. Keep up the good work." And I was like, "Oh, like this." It's Amanda is right. What a great way.
Yeah. Harris was the best in terms of his. He would watch everything that was comedy related.
Oh, wow.
We'd be talking about a TV show that like lasted for less than a season, and we'd be like, "Yeah, we watched a couple episodes of it. It wasn't that good." He's like, "Well, I watched all 15, and I thought that, it was like amazing." He really cared so much.
Because he was constantly emailing everybody involved. This is the best episode 9 of anything I've ever seen.
Yeah, I remember I wrote to Harris to tell him I liked Don't Stop or We'll Die song. I was like, hey man, I really like this song. And he just sent me the MP3 and was like, here you go. And I was just like, and it was like before you guys had out albums and stuff. And I was just like, this is the sweetest.
Yeah, he was a mensch. He's a good guy. Yeah.
End podcast.
Yeah. Who wants to plug something now?
That was Cowbell. We're so lucky to have all this talent here.
That was really fun. That was just an insane group. Paul Rust, super present. I don't think anything gets by him. It was really cool to see Secunda.
I've heard of The Swarm.
Yeah. And then Amanda Sitko, really funny writer that Tim knew. Really happy to know about her.
Yeah, that was really cool. You know what really struck me was when Andre was talking about how he would go into his, homeroom on a Monday and he would just repeat whatever comedy segment that he could remember, and he would just continue doing that. And it was interesting for me because that is my household. That is my husband and my daughter, who happen to share the same birth date.
Yeah, well, September 12th.
It's important to like find your people.
Yeah, I had a couple friendships that were just based on like quoting a particular movie, like one Airplane friend, one American Vacation friend, and I had a Seinfeld friend. Those are the ones that jump out at me.
That's probably what you needed at the time, right? And it was nice to have somebody that you needed. Like, that's what Andrew was saying.
And I thought it was really funny how he talked about the different kids would fill different niches. Like, oh, good. Like, neither one of them stealing each other's thunder. They can be at the same lunch table or whatever, you know? Like, I loved that image, you know?
Yeah. We are so lucky to have so many creative, professional,
homeless,
talented. I'm going to have to say talented people. Like, we're so lucky. And I'm just excited to continue doing this.
Yeah, no, I agree. And again, all sketches mentioned are in the show notes. We're calling that the rabbit hole section, and hope it will be a fun resource for the true nerds. You know who you are, or your friends do.
If you can please rate and review the show, that would be much appreciated. You can also find us on Instagram, YouTube, or JettRoadStudios.com, where you can sign up for the mailing list.
Thank you, everybody.
Jett Road Studios, where it's always pilot season.